In a real democracy, every citizen has the same prized possession, their vote. That vote gives you a say in whether you can earn a good living, whether your kids have access to decent schools, whether they'll be sent to war, and whether they'll get health care. When democracy crumbles, citizens become more like serfs. They labor under laws that are made by oligarchs and elites. They work 2 jobs for barely livable pay. They get taxed to fund Wall Street and wars and bank bailouts. Your vote is your power. And right now, the Democratic Party elites are trying to take it away from you. At the order of President Biden, the DNC is punishing states where President Biden lost in 2020. He came in 4th, for example, in Iowa and finished last in New Hampshire. So the DNC is trying to move those states out of their historic first slots and start instead with South Carolina, where President Biden finally won his first victory.
What are you going to do about RFK Jr.?
I'm very, very proud of the president, and we're going to get it done for him and Kamala Harris in this primary and again in the general election.
Those changes violate state laws, so the legislatures can't comply with the plan. But do you know who the real losers are? You are. You're going to lose your right to vote in a free and fair election. Based upon the DNC's plan, if you live in the state of New Hampshire or Iowa, your vote just won't count. And Georgia too, by the way. In that state, they want to kick anyone off the ballot if they campaigned in New Hampshire. These crooked measures will disenfranchise millions of citizens. These people will be robbed of their votes just because the elites say so. And it's not only voters in a handful of states that the DNC is trying to silence. It's every voter in every state. So how do they plan to do that? Oh, there's another rule that the committee is drafting behind closed doors, and it's similar to a trick that they used to kick Bernie Sanders out in 2016. They're flooding the convention with party operatives with opaque names like pleos and automatic delegates, whose job is to drown out the popular vote. Once the pleos and automatic delegates arrive at the Chicago convention next summer, the vote tallies all change, and the people's choice can be overturned in an instant. I could win 2/3 of the popular vote and still be denied the nomination. That's not democracy. That's theater. When I was growing up, this country was the democratic light of the world. We were the exemplar. We were the template for all the other nations on earth. This is what democracy looked like. We did it better than anybody. Based upon our example, dozens upon dozens of new democracies took root in every corner of the earth. But when we deny citizens their right to vote, and when we rig the process in favor of insiders, then the flames of democracy flickers, and someday soon it will go out. The good news is these rules don't take effect until the DNC votes on them on September 14th. So let's use our power while we still have it. It's time to demand a fair primary process where every vote counts equally, and the candidate who gets the most votes wins the nomination. That's the democracy we learned about in school. That's the democracy that people around the world yearn for. That's the democracy that we now have to fight to protect. Whomever you plan to vote for next year, now is the time to tell the DNC that you want democracy back in the Democratic Party.
The DNC is doing everything in their power to ensure that President Biden wins the Democratic nomination despite his approval ratings absolutely being in the tank. And if we heard about this election process that the DNC is running to ensure that President Biden wins, and you didn't know who RFK Jr. or Biden was, you might think this election was taking place in a third world country, just an absolute banana republic. But no, it's happening right here in the United States of America. So all this, of course, is making RFK Jr. strongly consider whether or not he should run as a third party. He's saying that he's a Democrat through and through, but if the DNC is not allowing him to win, if they're going to rig the election and pretty much stack the box against him, he might just run as a third party. And if he happens to do so, this might actually be the end of President Biden, and in turn could actually make it so former President Donald Trump actually ends up winning the election in 2024. So according to a new poll, if it's Trump, Biden, and Kennedy that voters had to choose from, 33% of Democratic voters say they would likely vote for Kennedy, and 14% of them say that they would very likely vote for Kennedy. Now, if 33% of voters for Biden in 2020 actually voted for Kennedy, that means that Biden would have lost around 27 million votes in total, which means that Trump very much likely would have actually won his re-election and currently been the president right here and now. So if we do end up having that scenario where it's going to be Biden versus Trump versus Kennedy, it's very likely that we're going to have enough voters switch their votes from Biden over to Kennedy, therefore allowing Trump to win. Now again, whether or not Kennedy decides to run as a third party, we'll just have to wait and see, but apparently the DNC just does not care. President Biden does not wish to grant him Secret Service protection even after this assassination attempt. He's not even talking about it. So here is RFK Jr.'s campaign manager explaining exactly why he deserves Secret Service protection. Watch.
I want to pick up on the tail end of Mike's reporting there, because it raises this question. Given the Kennedy family history, given the request for protection, now given this threat by this person pretending to be a U.S. Marshal, do you believe that the Biden administration is not acting on this out of a political drive?
Well, I don't think there's any question that this is a political decision. President Biden has it within his power to direct the Secret Service to protect Mr. Kennedy. He has chosen so far not to do that. We have appealed to him. I sent a letter this morning, once again, asking him in the name of fairness, in the name of not just protecting Mr. Kennedy, but protecting everyone around him, protecting the political process itself. And the fact that we have not yet received a positive response, given the escalating danger of the security environment, is astonishing.
So here's Miranda Devine in the New York Post. She says, what does it take for Joe Biden to grant his political rival, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Secret Service protection he's been requesting? Does Kennedy have to be mortally wounded by an assassin's bullet like his father or uncle? So have you received any response from the White House on this?
Not yet. I just want to say, Miranda Devine probably is one of those journalists who has her fingers on the pulse of what's happening in the country. And I think all Americans are starting to become concerned. Why isn't Mr. Kennedy, particularly given the history that Fox just laid out, why isn't Mr. Kennedy receiving Secret Service protection, especially in light of this recent incident? So we're continuing to appeal to the president to listen to the angels of his better nature, if you will, and to grant this very simple request, which, again, is not only about protecting Mr. Kennedy, it's about protecting everyone who's in that environment with him, and it is about protecting the American political process itself. We do not want to go through what this country went through when President Kennedy was assassinated. We cannot do that again. Let's just... What does it take? That's what I'm saying. What does it take for the president to respond?
Well, I guess, the obvious point here is that there appears to be an effort to pretend like he's not running, to pretend like this campaign isn't happening. And we see it, in some of the media around this. We see people saying, why isn't anyone running against the president? And your candidate says, well, hello, here I am. And I have some pretty decent poll numbers that are actually better than a lot of the Republicans who make the debate stage. So maybe it's time for people to start recognizing that. But this context note appeared on X after Mr. Kennedy's tweet. It says the Secret Service does not provide protection until 120 days before the general election. That would be July 8th, 2024. So that's the precedent that they're leaning on here for this.
Well, that is not a precedent, because there's a history that's replete in contradiction to that statement of people like President Obama and other candidates receiving protection far in advance of that so-called opening date. So this is really a question. The danger has presented itself. We've had an incident. A man with with guns, other weapons, impersonating a U.S. Marshal, nonetheless, trying to gain access to a secured perimeter. Look, what more do you want? And I'm saying this to President Biden. Please, Mr. President, recognize your responsibility not only to the candidates, but to the political process itself and to the nation, to make sure that we don't go through any kind of trauma as a result of anybody getting hurt.